Hey, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how the new federal property tax could end up costing you thousands of dollars in 2026 and what you need to do right now in order to protect yourself. Most homeowners think that the primary residence, the home that they live in, is safe from federal taxation in Canada. But that assumption has just been shattered. And if you don't understand what's actually coming, you could be facing a tax bill you've never really budgeted for. Here's what we're covering today. The federal government is implementing something called the Residential Property Equity Assessment, or RPEA for short. It's a brand new initiative. It could be a brand new federal tax on your home equity starting now in 2026. Now, this matters because it's not based on your property value, it's based on your equity. So it's the difference between what you paid for your home and what your home is worth today. And that's money that just exists on paper until you really sell, but they still want to tax that. I'll break it down who gets hit, how much you could end up paying, and the three moves you could make before these rules take effect. This isn't fear mongering and it's not complicated, but it is somewhat urgent. So let's get into it. What just happened? For months, Ottawa has been aggressive on housing policies. For instance, foreign buyer ban, underutilized housing tax, the underused housing tax, and many other taxes such as the short-term rental restrictions, etc. So every policy followed a pattern: big announcements, media debates, months of lead time, etc. But this time, the pattern went silent. Finance ministers and finance insiders noticed something odd. They noticed quiet meetings with provincial ministers, unusual requests for municipal property data, the Canada Revenue Agency hiring additional assessors. Therefore, Ottawa went quiet on these political changes. And when Ottawa goes quiet on politically charged file like this, it's usually something that's big that's coming. So early this month, it arrived. The Residential Property Equity Assessment, the federal levy on the equity you've built on your home. You know, all those years that you've gone to work 9 to 5 to pay your home off, the government could essentially be taxing that right now on your principal residence. It's not a replacement for your municipal property tax. It'll be an additional tax. If it passes, it'll be an additional tax levied by the federal government. So rewatch that again. They're taxing the equity you built by paying down your mortgage and watching your home appreciate over the years. And here's who gets hit. What we know so far is that this tax applies to all residential properties in Canada. That includes your primary residence. So your condo or your home or your townhouse that you've lived in for many years. It also applies for perhaps, let's say, your grandparents who have lived in their homes for 30, 40 years. Homes that were previously exempt from the federal property taxation on equity gain. But here's the kicker. Ottawa's targeting properties that have appreciated significantly since purchases. So homes that were bought for, 300,000 that are now possibly worth $3 million. So homeowners who paid down their mortgages, people who did exactly what they were told to do, are now going to be taxed by the government. And they're also told that their homes would never be taxed, by the way. So a lot of them have made financial decisions throughout their lives according to such trust statements, right? So instead of purchasing or buying a business or buying stocks in the stock market, they bought their home instead. Because if they were told that there were not going to be any tax consequences, that's one reasonable assumption that somebody would do. They would put money in their primary residence. Therefore, the government is taxing the reward for financial responsibility, and they're taxing also something they said they would never tax. So let me give you a real world example. So you bought your home in Vancouver in 2003. Let's say you paid 400,000 for it. Today that home is worth 1.2 million dollars. So you've paid your mortgage down now to $300,000. Your equity would therefore be around 900,000. And under these new rules, that $900,000 becomes taxable, even though you didn't sell it, and even though it only exists on paper, right? That profit only exists on paper because you haven't sold it. So even though you can't access it without selling your home, they're going to tax it, or they might tax it, I should say. The parliamentary budget officer estimates this could generate about $12 billion annually. And that's money coming from your pocket if you're a homeowner. It's coming from homeowners across Canada, in fact. So why is this different this time? And why is this tax whole different? Well, you may be thinking, the governments have always threatened new taxes. They might walk it back. This would just blow it over. Now, I get it. I've heard this too also before. But this time, it's different for a couple of reasons. In fact, three reasons, which I'm going to say right now. First, the infrastructure for this type of taxation is already being built. Provincial assessors are getting expanded access to federal property databases, and the CRA is hiring auditors specifically for real estate. And there's also new reporting requirements that force homeowners to disclose the, the purchase date, which they purchased it for. There's also an annual requirement to file whether or not you have kept that home. And there's a new reporting requirement for you to disclose your renovation costs. Now, why would they require you to, input all of these items if they weren't planning on taxing it? When Ottawa moves multiple pieces like this at once, it's usually not a trial balloon. It's a system that they're putting together, and it's a serious system that you should pay attention to. Second, the backlash has been immediate and massive. Within 48 hours, I believe it was, the Canadian Taxpayer Federation launched a legal challenge. Provincial premiers from Alberta, from Saskatchewan, and Ontario issued joint statements as well. And mortgage brokers, even my mortgage broker, they reported panic calls from some homeowners asking if they should sell before 2027. So this isn't just policy talk. This is real, and some homeowners are really catching on. So I would encourage you to also pay attention to this. The third item that makes this a very real threat is that the timing of this, it tells you everything. The government announced this before an election year, and that's not an accident. They're trying to normalize the idea before voters go to the poll, right? So they make it somewhat normal to that this is just a normal tax, when in fact this is probably the largest taxation in Canadian history, most likely. So who gets hit the hardest? Tax experts are saying this will devastate three possible groups. The first group are our Canadian retirees, so people who are going to get retired right now, people on fixed incomes who are possibly equity rich, but they're cash poor. They can't afford to pay taxes on wealth they can't access it without selling their homes that they've lived in for decades, right? The second group are the small business owners. So these are entrepreneurs like, restaurant owners, your local business salon, entrepreneurs who use their home equity as collateral for business loans. So like, to build their restaurant out, or to build their salons, et cetera, et cetera. And this tax reduces their borrowing power and increases their cost as well. The third group are the young homeowners. So these are first-time buyers who just stretched to get into the market. They're already dealing with high interest rates, as we know, and mortgage renewals, which are going to be, coming down a lot the pipeline this year. So this is a huge double whammy for them. And it's not something that they've signed up for. If they have a substantial amount of equity in their condo or their townhouse, they're going to have to be paying a portion of that to the government now. The Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives even expressed concern about the impact on the middle class, right? On the homeowners who are part of the middle class in Canada. And when the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives are worried, it's usually a serious case. Now, this is what you can do. I'm going to give you some tips on what you could do right now. Of course, it's not, the only thing you could do, but it's some of the things that you could do, right? So enough doom and gloom. Let's move on to the something that you could possibly do regarding all this. So the number one thing you can do is you should understand how much exposure you have to all this. Is your property a $3 million property, or is it a $500,000 condo? Is it do you own that together with your spouse, or do you own it just yourself? These are levels of exposures that you're going to have to determine, and how much impact it's going to have in your life, right? In terms of cash flow. So you should the move number one you should do right now, also calculate how much home equity you have right now. So take your current property value minus what you owe, and that's your potential tax base, right? So financial planners usually estimate the tax could start at around 0.5% to 1% annually on your equity before a certain threshold. And I think that, that's around like $500,000 to $1 million. So after that threshold, that amount could be even more, right? So we don't know. And run the numbers to see what you're facing. The second thing you could do right now is you could start documenting everything that you've done to your home. Keep records of all your home improvements, your renovations, your capital investments, like if you changed a roof, or if you renovated the kitchen. So make sure you keep a record of all those, even though it's your principal residence, because you'll need to disclose these costs possibly to the government. The better documentation you have, the better, you could possibly argue the lower and then lower your assessed values, right? You should also consider your options. I'm not saying you should sell your property, but talk to a tax professional about your specific situation. Some homeowners are exploring equity drawdown strategies. Others are looking at restructuring their home ownership. There are definitely different legal moves that you can do. So you should talk to your lawyer. And I think that deserves a video on its own. So I'll keep that in the back. Even though I'm not a tax consultant, I can talk to my tax lawyer and see what he can come up with. But don't wait. The clock is definitely ticking. Therefore, the homeowners who act now will have options, but the ones who wait will definitely, well, could possibly face bills if this passes legislation. So here's the political reality. Here's what's really happening behind the scenes. Internal polling shows that this policy is really unpopular with Canadian homeowners, and not surprisingly, even among traditional government supporters, it's also being, very unpopular. So some cabinet ministers are even privately expressing concerns about the timing of this tax. Our governments do have a lot of debt to pay. So if there's any time, this could possibly be it, because they need to pay down a lot of debt that we owe. And well, the government thought Canadians would accept this in a fairness measure, like tax the rich, close the wealth gap, and all that rhetoric. But I think they miscalculated it. And homeowners aren't staying quiet. So multiple petitions hit 100,000 signatures, I think, within 72 hours. And members of parliament in suburban ridings are getting flooded with calls and emails. Therefore, if public pressure continues, the government might be forced to modify, delay, or abandon the policies entirely. But that's a big if. But if it's possible, it would be great. The question is whether Canadians will keep fighting, because governments respond to pressure. They always have and they always will. Now, what really matters here? Let me be blunt. This isn't really about fairness. This is about revenue for government and to pay the deficit and to pay the debt. Healthcare costs are exploding, defense spending is increasing, and interest rates are not lowering. So we have a record deficit and debt, trillions of dollars that we owe, and so the governments need this money. This is what makes it so ominous, right? And the easiest pot to tax are the Canadian homes, trillions of dollars in equity. But here's what they're missing: Canadians care deeply about their homes. Property ownership is the foundation of wealth building in this country. It's how families build security, and it's how parents leave something for their kids. Therefore, when you tax home equity, you're not just taxing wealth, you're taxing the Canadian dream itself. And that's why backlash is so fierce. Now, look, I've been through the 2008 crisis. I've been through the COVID crisis, as a real estate professional. I've seen governments panic and make desperate moves. And this sort of feels like one of those moments where they really need their money and they really need to pay that debt down. So the bottom line is the residential property equity assessment could be coming in 2026, unless the public pressures to stop it. You should definitely know your numbers, document your costs, and talk to a tax professional to see what your current situation is. Also, stay informed. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be tracking every development on this story. My name is Richard Morrison. I've guided investors through every financial crisis in 25 years here selling and buying real estate. I buy real estate in Canada and the United States. I've helped over $350 million in deals. My clients didn't just survive, they thrived. And if you want to do the same, you need to act right now. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care.